Read your thoughts. From the future.
The movies of 1985.
Hello. My name is Jason Hutchins. I'm stuck in the year 1985, and normally what I would do is I would spin a bingo machine to select a movie to go and rent from my local video store. But unfortunately today, I really wish I had a time machine because somehow I stuffed up the recording of this podcast. So if you know me in real life, you'll know that last week I went and did a bike packing tour, and I tried to get the podcast done before leaving. And when I returned, lo and behold, the file, the recording just did not exist anymore. I've somehow inadvertently deleted it. So instead of doing what I normally do, which is roll the bingo machine to select a movie, I just have to tell you which movie came out of the bingo machine when I rolled it before my bike packing tour. And it was ball number 43, which was The Colour Purple. That is the second purple movie of this year, along with The Purple Rose of Cairo. So The Colour Purple is a Steven Spielberg movie. I've never seen it. I am looking forward to watching it. I think it's a movie that has a lot of cachet, I suppose you would say. So I am going to go and rent it from the local video store. Before I do that, let me just switch the TV on and you can watch an ad while I'm away.
Farewell to old England forever. Farewell to
Were the early convicts sent to Australia, or did they volunteer?
everyone miss you, 'cause we're getting violet crumble, singing to a light.
Oh, so how are you enjoying Australia?
Well, we're certainly enjoying the violet crumble. That's what we came for. True crumbling honeycomb and a delicious chocolatey coating.
Okay, I'm back. Let me just
all this way?
Sometimes it just has to be violet crumble.
Violet crumble. It's the way it shatters that matters. That purple wrapped chocolate bar, very famous in Australia. When I was in Israel, I bought, I used to live there back in the early 2000s, and I used to bring violet crumbles over from Australia, and they likened it to the wall insulation that they used when they were building their homes. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. So this video cover is extremely purple, and it features prominently a Stephen King film. Sorry, not Stephen King, a Steven Spielberg film on the cover, where we see a silhouette of what very much looks like Whoopi Goldberg sitting on a rocking chair in a very Americana kind of pose, reading something. There's not much on the front cover apart from that image. So turning over to the back, there's a couple of photos. There's actually a photo of the director, Steven Spielberg, directing Whoopi Goldberg, which is interesting. You wouldn't normally see that sort of photo on the back of a VHS cassette cover. And I should say that I'd pedaled my bike over to Videoflix in Sampson, which is not too far from where I live, at least in the year 1985. And I should also have said that it's week 17 of 1985. That's Tuesday the 23rd of April to Monday the 29th of April. But apart from those two little photos, there's a quote that says, "It's about life, it's about love, it's about us." And then there's a little spiel about Alice Walker's joyous Pulitzer Prize winning novel, which she wrote in 1982. That's The Colour Purple, which Quincy Jones produced and Steven Spielberg directed. Now, most of the back cover, however, is an interview with Steven Spielberg, and you can see that the marketing department are trying to ride on his coattails. He's obviously quite a famous director by this point in time, so it has a little interview with him rather than information about the movie. I was really drawn to the heroic growth of the central character, Sally, says Spielberg, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? So it stars Danny Glover, Adolph Caesar, Margaret Avery, and of course, introducing Whoopi Goldberg. There's one name that isn't on the credits at the back of the movie, and that is Oprah Winfrey. She also has her first movie role in The Color Purple. Quincy Jones, apart from producing the movie, was responsible for the score and composing some of the music that's used throughout the film. Anyway, that's about enough said. The movie is over 2 hours long. If you're in Australia, you can watch it on the usual streaming services, or you can rent it on those, or you might even want to watch the 2023 remake, which is available for free on Netflix, I believe. Anyway, let's press play on tape and watch Steven Spielberg's The Color Purple.
The Color Purple. An American story for the whole world. It's about life. It's about love. It's about us. You will always remember, Mr. Suge. Old Mister. Nettie. Harpo. Squeak. Sophia. And Seeley. You will never forget The Color Purple.
Wow. So that was a long movie. I think it's well over 2.5 hours. It looks beautiful. It's really well shot. The outdoor locations, the cinematography, it's really nice. It's a period piece, obviously. The story takes you through 40 years of this young girl's life, Seeley, played by Whoopi Goldberg. In her later years, you don't actually see Whoopi Goldberg or Oprah Winfrey until about the 35-minute mark. In the first half an hour of the film, Whoopi Goldberg's character is played by a different actress. But probably the main problem with this movie is, apart from the fact that, it's very, very dark in places. So the storyline involves rape, incest, marital abuse, things like that. But at the same time, you've got this very modern Spielbergian way of directing the movie that makes it not quite look like a period piece in the style that you'd come to expect from watching British movies, for example. And he also mixes it up with a few comedic moments which don't really balance the darkness of the rest of the movie, I suppose. So it is a bit of a weird one. Now, like I said, this is based on a book that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1983. It was the first time a black woman had been given the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And the novel was written in 1982, and it's an epistolary novel, which is basically, instead of the author writing a narrative, it's basically a collection of letters, and presumably they're letters between Seeley and her sister Nettie, I think it is. Presumably that's what the book is. And, I'm not a big fan of these sorts of books. I'm not sure whether I could sit down and read it. I've tried reading books like that in the past and they've never really grabbed me. Anyway, it's hard to give, normally what I'd do is I'd give a setup of the first 20 minutes of the movie. It's hard to do that for this one because you are just following a character. There's no real plot apart from that. The plot is the life of the main character, and it takes the entire movie to tell her life from when she was a young girl and got separated to her sister all the way until when she's an old woman and she's reunited with her sister. But I'll give it a shot anyway. So let's have a look at the first 25 minutes. So like a lot of the movies from 1985 that I've complained about, there's a long, drawn-out opening credit sequence. So for the first minute and a half, it's just a black screen with white cursive, not white, it's purple cursive writing that just, goes through the entire credit sequence. And like I said, introducing Oprah Winfrey and Whoopi Goldberg. Oprah Winfrey at the time had been a presenter on Chicago television, and in the following year, 1986, her Oprah Winfrey Show would debut and run for a while. Whoopi Goldberg was known, I suppose, for comedy, but this was her first dramatic role or her first role in a movie. So anyway, we fade in to the two sisters standing in a field of purple flowers. So that's the colour purple. They reference that right at the end of the movie when one of the sisters says that, God wouldn't want you to ignore the colour purple, as you are walking through this field of flowers. Anyway, so Celie, played by Whoopi Goldberg in her first role, but in the opening sequence played by a younger actress, and Nettie, they're growing up in idyllic surroundings, but of course they are being abused and raped by their father, and Celie actually has a couple of babies to her father that are stolen from her and given to, I believe, a missionary or a priest that goes on a missionary tour of Africa with her son and her daughter, who she doesn't see since, like, she loses them when they're young babies and she reunites with them when they're adults at the end of the movie. So it's very dark and disturbing. What happens then is Mr., this character played by Donald Glover from the Lethal Weapon movies, would sort of see him in those in 1987. We find out later that his character's name is Albert, but the two girls refer to him as Mr. He's eyeing off Nettie, the younger sister, in church. So he's widowed. His wife was murdered by her former boyfriend, and he is trying to raise 3 kids on his own while running a farm. So he needs a wife. He approaches Nettie's and Celie's father, but he won't let Nettie marry him because she's too young. He says that Celie's been spoiled. She's given birth to 2 of her own father's children. Very disturbing indeed. So he ends up marrying Celie instead. So in the first 10 minutes, Celie is married off and moved in with this abusive Mr. Albert. So she's abused by his children. She's abused by her husband. And she also spots her adopted baby daughter, Olivia, not really adopted, stolen, in a grocery store where the minister's wife is carrying her. Nettie runs away from their abusive dad and ends up staying with Celie and Mr. But he later banishes her when she refuses his advances. That's 25 minutes in. So by the 25-minute point, Celie's been married off to an abusive husband. Nettie's been banished, and you don't see her again until the end of the movie. And then for the rest of the 2 hours that are left on the clock, we basically just follow Celie's life as she gets older and all of her experiences that she goes through. Now, like I said, we don't see Whoopi or Oprah until about the 35-minute mark. So, what can I say about this movie? It is disturbing. It is dark. I would give it 3.5 stars. I'm not sure. It's not quite a Mintox. I'm not going to recommend that you watch it. It is a movie that I'm glad that I saw because I think it is a historic movie. It is Steven Spielberg's first serious movie. And it paves the way to later movies like Empire of the Sun and Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan and things like that. So he sort of learns how to make a serious movie. Doesn't quite pull it off. It is still a little bit too Spielbergian, but it does look great. Like I said, there's a lot of beautiful in-focus cinematography where, especially that, a lot of the plot revolves around the letterbox because Celie is waiting for letters from Nettie, which she never receives because her abusive husband Albert is hiding them away. But there's a lot of shots of the letterbox where the letterbox is in focus and all of the far away background behind the letterbox is also in focus. And it's just not something that you see these days. A lot of the story is also told through shadow play. So the cover of the VHS cassette had this silhouette of Celie sitting in a rocking chair reading a letter. And that is used throughout the movie as well. You see shadows on the wall. You see the girls hanging up bed sheets with shadows showing through them. That's used quite effectively as well. It was also interesting to see Lawrence Fishburne pop up. He, from The Matrix, he popped up in a small cameo appearance. He's sort of the guitar player in the band, and he's like friends with Albert. Anyway, like I said, about 3.5 stars from me. That's The Colour Purple. But for now,
I'm driving along and I'm just singing my song. I'm in a news-free zone.
welcome to the News-Free Zone, everybody. That time of the podcast where we look back at the news from the year 1985 so that we don't have to read the news from 2025. So this week in 1985, week 17, Acorn Computers over in the UK powered up its first RISC processor. That's a reduced instruction set processor. The Acorn RISC machine, abbreviated to ARM or ARM, marking the beginning, of course, of a processor architecture that would dominate the mobile and embedded computing markets even to this day. Processors are everywhere. Also, this week in 1985, Alexei Pachednov completed the first playable prototype of Tetris on an Electronica 60 computer in the Soviet Union. The game would later become one of the most iconic and widely played video games of all time. In Australia, The Flying Doctors airs. So The Flying Doctors started, I believe, this week in 1985. Also, we had the 70th anniversary of the Anzac Day services. So the World War I landings in Gallipoli were on the 25th of April 1915. So the 70th anniversary in 1985, 110th anniversary in 2025. And finally, this week in 1985, the West German Parliament, because of course Germany was split between East and West at the time, the West German Parliament ruled that it is illegal to deny the Holocaust, something that some people could remember these days, I think. Now, over on Usenet, which was 1985's version of social media, if you go to olduse.net, you can read social media from the year 1985, which I find quite interesting. So on net.books, they announced the 1985 Hugo nominations. The Hugo Awards, of course, in 1985 were held at Worldcon in Melbourne, Australia, in August later on this year. But the nominations for Best Novel included Neuromancer by William Gibson, the foundational cornerstone book of cyberpunk, as we were talking about last week, I believe. The other movies are Job by Robert Heinlein, The Integral Trees by Larry Niven, Emergence by David Palmer, and The Peace Ward by Werner Vinge, none of which I have read, but I probably should. They also had a category for Best Dramatic Presentation, i.e. the best movie. And they were June, Ghostbusters, The Last Starfighter, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and 2010, the sequel to 2001, A Space Odyssey. Kind of interesting. So over on net.micro.mac, a user was posting about the MegaMac upgrade, which was a third-party 1 megabyte memory upgrade for your Macintosh computer, which cost a measly $1,600 US fully installed. And he loved it, this guy. He said Mac Paint does not need to load from disk after you, like when you show the page or move the window around. And MacWrite will now accept huge documents. Starting and exiting an application is also pleasantly speedy. So that's the kind of money people were shelling out for 1 megabyte of memory, which is kind of crazy because on my little backpacking tour, I took along a 1 terabyte memory card, which cost me $160, which is 1/10 of that for, what is it? Billions. Not billions, but that's what. Will can do the maths here. It's 1,000 times. No, that would be a gigabyte. So it's 1,000,000 times more memory or something like that. I don't even know. It's mind blowing. Also, someone posted that in the San Francisco Examiner, John Dvorak, who was a columnist there at the time, reported that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were on the verge of announcing a Microsoft integrated package for the Macintosh of a program that was going to be named Excel. So nobody knew what Excel was. Rumors are it's a spreadsheet program integrated with chart and database and would only recalculate cells that require recalculation. So some sort of dependency framework there. Another thing that I looked at when I was looking through the TV commercials from 1985 was Mars bars. Because I tell you what, I've just bought a Mars bar in the year 2025 and I was severely disappointed. It was 47 grams of sadness for $2.50, or at least the recommended retail price was $2.50. So I checked the TV commercials from 1985, and in 1985 it was 55 grams for only 40 cents. Now, if you factor in inflation, you would expect that 1985, that was buying you 1.4 grams of Mars bar for 1 cent. In 2025, you would expect to be able to buy 0.4 grams of a Mars bar for 1 cent. But what we're paying in the actual year 2025 is half of that. We are getting 0.2 grams of Mars bar for every cent that we spend, which is insane. Also, if you go to the year 1995, there was this thing. Now, you might remember this ad I played earlier this year where Cadbury just decided to give you 10% more for the same price for some of their chocolate bars. So by 1995, a Mars bar was 65 grams, 10 grams more than a decade before, and it had gone up by only 20 cents to 60 cents. So it is interesting, the shrinkflation these days. It's extremely disappointing, and we are being made fools of, aren't we? So what else is happening? Actually, I think that's it. I think Mars bar news is probably the last piece of news. They used to be really hefty and substantial, I remember, in the mid-90s. They were weighty, weren't they? You'd eat one and that would be it. That was all you needed for work, rest and play. These days, it doesn't even get you through work. And you used to go into the corner deli and the Mars bar would be in the fridge with the Coke. Mars bar and a Coke, that was all the sugar you needed for a healthy lifestyle. In fact, the Mars bar was the official snack food of the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, and they had a lot of goodness in them, didn't they? All that glucose and molten milk and chocolate and things like that. But nowadays it just makes me cry just to see how insubstantial they are and how expensive they are. Anyway, let's cue the electric tom-toms, and until next week, buy a big chocolate bar.